for life. Sorry. Like every time I'm just like having a heart attack. But anyway, hi Jeff, welcome to Winter with Grace.
Thank you so much, Grace. So excited to be here.
Okay, awesome. So let's quickly give the audience a little bit of your background. So you're an entrepreneur and your first company was successfully, I don't know if it's your first company, like, because you co-founded a bunch of companies. So um, not your first company. Okay, I got it. So basically your first company was sold it to Box. And then later on, your second company was sold it to Twitter. And then now you're obviously on your third company, which is like also super successful. Why don't we kind of like start with the core lessons that you've learned early on in your journey as an entrepreneur that you kind of took each step of the way to now running your own company now?
Yeah, perfect. So, to give a quick background, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland on the East Coast. Not a lot of tech happening there, but it was a great place to grow up. I got very lucky, and my parents actually gave me a Mac programming book, Mac
Mm,
Programming for Dummies, when I was in sixth grade. And so at 12 years old, I just sort of dove into learning how to program and taught myself C and fell in love with it. And sort of that was the beginning of this whole journey. I just really fell in love with the ability to make a computer do what you want it to and build a tool that is useful and saves people time. And so I came out west to Silicon Valley for college, got immersed in the whole entrepreneurship scene. And as I started sort of my first company and then entered into this journey of three, I've really sort of tied in on this theme of like software that saves people time. And it's always been problems that I myself experienced. And that has just been a huge unlock because when you personally know and understand and experience the issue you're trying to solve, I think you just have such a speed boost in really being able to identify the product and feature set you need in order to bring it to market. So my first company in Creo, we were doing document collaboration. This was back in 2007, 2008. We had some of the first tech to display 100 different file formats in a web browser, let you draw on them, mark them up, comment on them in real time. The funny thing is this sounds stupid today, but if you go back to 08, 07, like that tech did not exist. We ended up raising money from DFJ, got acquired by Box. It was the first deal Aaron Levy ever did. And we ended up powering document display on Box for the next 5 years with our technology, which was pretty cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. So like, I'll let you finish until like your second company was acquired by Twitter, and then we can dive into the thing.
Yeah. So out of Box, I spent a bunch of time at Box, ended up leading their sync efforts because they were trying to compete with Dropbox at the time. This was
Mhm.
back in 2009, 2010. And really fell into crash analysis and debugging because sync algorithms are super complex, high memory usage, really bad crashes. And so I sort of stumbled into this field and started a company called Crashlytics doing mobile crash analysis. And so helping app developers figure out what line number of code their app crashed on. We got very lucky with the timing. This was in 2011. Mobile was ramping like crazy. And so we ended up scaling to 300 million devices in the first 12 months since launch. That just like kept going. We did end up getting acquired by Twitter. I spent 2 years running their developer platform and their SDKs. And then in 2015, Twitter named me head of product. And
Mm.
so it was a really interesting transition to see sort of B2B collaboration software, then developer tooling, and then sort of obviously vast scale
Mhm.
consumer at Twitter.
Mm, totally. I have so many questions there. So like I know that you have built originally there like I guess like since I listened to one of your interviews with Tina Stilling, which is like a
Yep.
Stanford professor. It was like and then I think you did a panel like I guess 15 years ago or something like at Stanford about like acquisition or like M&A and stuff like that. And then recently you acquire like Baby's company. And like I wonder when you were thinking about since you are a successful entrepreneur throughout like the three companies, what's the TLDR on like creating a popular product and then how does it play into being acquired by different companies?
Interesting. Great question. So on the product side, I think you need to be extremely focused,
Mhm.
particularly as a small startup, you can really only afford to do one thing well. And
Mm,
so you need to be really intentional about that one thing is. And I wouldn't say they were all equally successful. Like for in Creo, we had document collaboration software, let you draw files in the draw and comment on files in the
mhm,
browser, but it was really hard to get out to market. We were sort of competing
mhm,
with email and other things. And
mhm,
that was sort of how the acquisition came about. We ended up being unable to raise our Series A round. It was a terrible market timing. This was right after the 2008 housing collapse, sort of recession. And then with Crashlytics, I decided, like, let's be even more focused. The entire product only had 3 pages. Like, you would see your list of crashes. You could click on an issue, which was one of the issues we detected, and then you could click on an individual crash. And that was it. And I think by focusing it so insanely, you basically identify your target market very quickly. It's like, do they either want that or they don't want that? And we had been very intentional to try to make it the most reliable, most secure, like all the other attributes developers really want. And so that focus really paid off. With Digits, it's been a 6-year journey, because in accounting, you can't just build one thing, right? If you just do one part of the accounting workflow, it's sort of useless. And so we've had to go on this much broader journey in order to build the whole feature set we need to really serve the market. And so as you're thinking about your product, I would really just do extreme focus, like cut everything else you can.
I am taking notes. I wonder, how do you know that, like, that one product, or like that extreme focus is on the right direction? Since, like, I feel like at the beginning everybody has like 4,000 ideas. How you land at that one thing that kind of works?
Yes. This is the hard part. And so I think it is an unfair advantage if you're building something to solve a problem you yourself have, because then you do tend to understand the core of the issue. For those building stuff in sort of other markets, the importance of cluster development cannot be overstated. You need to talk with dozens, maybe 50 plus people in that market to really start narrowing in on, like, what are the shared issues and what's like the core root problem that you can go solve. I think there's a real danger. A lot of people tend to get feedback from investors, or they're talking with their friends who are other startup founders, or they're talking with a buddy who went through YC. None of those people are your customers, right? Make sure you're talking only with actual customers that have lived the problem. And that's how you start refining what the core thing is you need to build.
I have a piggyback question on that. I really like what you said about, like, identify the customer, or like identify the 50 people you talk to. But I wonder, like, when it comes to right now, you're building an accounting product that's very different than, like, at the beginning it was like crash tooling, that maybe it's
Yeah.
like kind of like developer focused, which is like a subset of sector of people maybe who are focusing on like security or like compliance or something. I wonder, like, when it comes to building a product, how do you think about like the market? So accounting, obviously we just briefly chat about like runway and digits, like, so, how do you decide which part to focus? Because I feel like if you're focusing on like every single accounting firm, small businesses, how do you really tackle them? It's like just going to like a accounting organization to be like, hey, give me a list of like 50 accountant, I'm just gonna cold call them, or what's kind of your approach to understand the problem? And versus like if you have a subset of sector, let's call it like, you have 5 customer, they're like Goldman Sachs and or something like, but they do major financial planning or something. I don't know. So I
Yeah.
wonder, how do you identify, do you go niche but charge more, or broad but charge less?
Really good question. So Digits came out of my past experience. And so what really struck me, particularly at Crashlytics and then at Twitter at a whole different scale, was the difference between the product engineering side of businesses and the finance side. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is, in product engineering, you have Google Analytics, A/B testing tools, Grafana, things like Crashlytics, all this performance monitoring dashboards, right? You can see exactly what your users are doing. And all of those tools are effectively real time and
mhm,
effectively free to set up. And then on the finance side, as the business owner, as the founder, you're
mhm,
sitting there waiting 2 to 3 weeks every single month for your books to close, for you to get your
mhm,
financials. And when you finally get them, it's a black and white PDF with your balance sheet and P&L and so on. And it's like, that was crazy to me. And so when we started focusing on the accounting space, I kept going back to just that core problem. Like, to me, that was the single most painful part. And so let's solve that. And we basically fell down that rabbit hole and just like kept digging to figure
mhm,
out what the root of that problem was. And it goes back to the core bookkeeping process. Is you are trying to gather all of the financial activity from your banks, credit cards, payment processors like Stripe,
mhm,
payroll, your cap table, whatever it is that
mhm,
happened in the business that month. The accountants need to bring all of that together in order to give you your books.
mhm,
And so we started Digits with this just extreme focus on how do we bring all that bookkeeping data together as quickly as possible
Mhm.
and make sense of it. And so then as you go out in the space, we have sold through founders, through our network, right? Like they want better visibility. And then you start going out to the accounting industry and partnering with top firms and really understanding their needs and how they view that problem. And sort of you have to adjust the product for the different market segments, but the core solution is the same.
Mm. What does the competitive landscape look like? I feel like when you're pitching to investors, everybody probably I think, like, whenever people say TAM, you're, like, a successful angel investor, I'm sure you've heard about, like, people talking about their TAM is, like, $2
Yep.
trillion, but how do you kind of, like but as a founder, you have to pitch to the investor, like, what's your thought process on, like, actually, what is our market? Who are we going after? Like, and then the earned insights on why we will win.
Yeah, I've taken the same approach actually, both on the founder side and the angel investor side. At sort of the seed stage when you're starting, I basically look for, is this a very strong founding team?
Mhm,
And are they pursuing a very large market? And so
mhm,
if you look at the companies I've started, you don't really doubt the market size. Like our pitch was, we
mhm,
are empowering document collaboration. That was clearly a huge market. Then we
mhm,
were empowering mobile application development. That was clearly going to be a huge market. Now we're going after the accounting industry. That is literally a 170 billion plus market every single year in the US alone.
mhm,
And
mm,
so I've always viewed it as you don't need to overly justify like exactly the market size if your
mhm,
market is obviously very big. And
mm,
so then it's basically have a smart founding team with some unfair advantage, unfair knowledge, unfair
mm.
connections. You want something unique about the founding team, pursuing a very large market. And I think if you string those three together, it's a pretty safe bet to either start the company or invest in the company.
I, like, love what you said about, like, obviously having a big market is, like, really important. How do you define big? So, like, basically, when I talk to people, people are like, "Oh, we're building this really niche product for, I don't know, people walking the dogs." And then but
Yep.
among this sector, like, later on, we're gonna branch out to people walking their cat people don't walk their cats. Or
Right.
it's like, we're the automated pet solution for, like, 75 people, like, 75, like, millions of people or blah, blah, blah. So how do you define when people say, "Hey, they're gonna enter like a niche market first, and then eventually build up something that will scale into the future?" And when you're talking about strong founding team, does this mean just like technical expertise, or like are they able to sell something? Like, how do you kind of do the due diligence on that?
Yeah, both great questions. So on the market size, you're right. You want to be operating in a large market. Obviously, you're not going to be able to address that entire market day one.
Mhm,
So you want to focus on one particular niche that's going to be your beachhead that you
mhm,
can land and monetize, and then basically prove your right to expand your feature set as you can address this huge market. And so,
mhm,
like, dog walkers, great. Like the pet
mhm,
industry is massive.
mhm,
If you can paint that picture of how you go from like walking dogs to serving all pet owners,
mhm,
that could be a very strong pitch. You might get investor pushback. How much are dog walkers willing to pay? I don't
mhm,
know. Like you'll have a bunch of other questions, but if you can tell the story right, that is a large market.
mm,
When you're looking at your founding team, and what I look for on the investor side is you want really complementary skill sets. So you don't want two people with the same background who worked at the same companies. They're not going to bring anything new to the table.
mhm,
You ideally want someone who's like experienced on the business side, someone who's experienced on the technical side. Again, depending upon the shape of the business or what product you're building. So I would say what's more important though is again some unique insight or access to the industry. And so to give a really concrete example, a lot of people were intrigued of like, oh, why am I building digits? I have no background in finance or accounting.
mm,
And that is completely true. What we did realize as we started researching the space, the technology approach on how we classified crashes at Crashlytics on a
mhm,
scale of 3+ billion a day was actually very similar to how you can think about classifying transactions in a bookkeeping workflow. And
mm,
so the core infrastructure and core technical approaches were quite similar. And that is, I believe, what gave us sort of an unlock in this industry.
mm. I like what you said about, like, going down to, like, the core technology or core infrastructure. Since I'm not technical, but I did listen to your technical interview with this other person about AI. How do you think about like, I know that you mentioned about, like, accounting, the best you can do is, like, maybe 90% correct, or, like, maybe the last mile have to still be done by human because they have more contacts. I wonder, when you're thinking about building digits as a product, how do you kind of bake AI into it? And, how do you think about, let's say, if today you and I start a new company, we're doing, um, I don't know, like, what is the equivalent of accounting? Maybe legal. So,
Yep, yep.
so let's say if we want to digitize like the lawyer industry, like what's gonna be our three things that we need to do today to like get this going?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the big mistake a lot of people are making
Mhm,
is they view AI as this cure-all panacea like magic, right?
mhm,
And what I really advise founders to think about it is think about it as a tool like a database,
mhm,
right? You didn't start a new company because a database existed.
mhm,
You started a company to solve a problem, and you
mhm,
probably need a database to do that. And
mm,
so get really crisp on why you're starting the company, what problem you're solving, and does this tool apply? And so I would view it as a tool in your sort of toolbox of solutions, not as like the AI is the company, right? The AI is going to be a piece of it, but you still need to build a good product. It needs to let people log in and take their actions and collaborate and do whatever else they need to do in
mhm,
your solution. And a lot of that's not AI. That's just going to be real traditional software engineering, right? You still need to design and build a good product. And so when you're starting to think about a space, think about what capabilities AI unlocks. Maybe you can build something better in the market that didn't exist before because AI didn't exist, but don't view it as like the one-stop shop.
mm. Um, can we break down a little bit on like how you maybe put AI into digits? So like I know that using it as a toolbox, right? So first of all, like when you are doing like accounting software, how do you like what would be call it like three questions that you ask the accountant or like small accounting agencies? First
Yep.
of all, how do you find them? I feel like there's so many of them. Like how do you know like whose ideas like kind of like qualify as your like a potential people to buy the product, and like the price point, how do you price it? And then um maybe we can dive into like the AI part
Yeah,
later.
so sort of two different things there. So first on the accounting industry, the American accounting industry is actually pretty small and tight knit. So
Mm,
there are 44,000 American accounting firms, right? So it's a big number, but not a crazy number. And they're very interconnected in terms of
mhm,
relationships and word of mouth and conferences.
mhm,
And so you can go to a handful of conferences each year, which our team does, and you
mhm,
can meet thousands of accountants. And
mhm,
so we've already worked with 1,500 plus accounting firms at Digits. That's actually like a meaningful percentage of the entire
mhm,
market.
mhm,
And so it's surprisingly easy to get into some of these industries as you really
mhm,
dive in and get into the details. When you think about the AI, what we've been really intentional about is breaking the problems down into the smallest chunks possible. And
mm,
so you don't want to just tell ChatGPT, go do my accounting, right?
mhm,
It's going to hallucinate something crazy.
mhm,
And if you think about accounting and bookkeeping as an industry, it is mostly not generative,
mhm,
right? You do not want an LLM generating an answer to your books. What it actually is predictive. And so we have spent 5 years at Digits training over a dozen predictive models that collaborate to do the bookkeeping. And so all of these models are sort of purpose built, purpose trained to be really good at one piece of the bookkeeping process. And they work together to make that happen
mhm,
versus just handing stuff to ChatGPT. And so, again, as you're thinking about building an AI tool, break down the problem, view the AI as one part of the solution. And we believe like the AI will get really good at 90, maybe 95% of it. The rest is still going to be done by a human expert CPA.
mm,
And that's great, right? Like if you can remove 90% of the tedium from their plate, you've made their work life a million times better. And they can really focus on the interesting advisory work, helping the clients, et cetera.
mm. What is the 95% that AI can do? And
So
how do you use AI to do it?
yeah. So all of the basic bookkeeping AI can get very, very good at. So the way to think about it is you look at your bank account each month, you look at your credit card statement each month. Expenses are a huge portion of the transaction volume that come into most businesses. And so you can train AI models to get really good at categorizing those transactions. And so basically, for those familiar with Mint back in the day,
Mhm.
Mint was one of the first tools that made it easy to look at your personal finances, but their categorization was a little awkward. It wasn't great. AI can do that, but really, really reliably.
Mm.
And so that's sort of the big case. Then it gets more and more detailed because then you want it to start booking your income and invoices and revenue. You want it to start booking your payroll. You have all of these different aspects of the bookkeeping process. And so we train different models that get really good at different pieces of it.
Mm. I wonder, can you maybe give us an overview on how the accounting industry kind of works? So I just quickly calculated if you want to be like have $100 million ARR, um, it's kind of like you have to sell the 44K accounting firms like 2000 plus 2000 to $3,000 ish product every
Yep.
year. So what's like how do you kind of think about pricing your product?
Yeah, great question. So what you're correct in that. The whole industry is again approaching like $200 billion,
Mm,
massive industry.
mm,
Today, most of that is services spend. So a typical accounting firm will spend about 10% of their income on software, about 90% on services. And so obviously all
mm,
their people and overhead and so on. What we believe is that AI is going to start changing that balance, and an increasing percent of it will go to sort of AI enabled software in the sector, and a decreasing percent of it will go with services. And that's actually good for the industry. So if you look at the accounting industry at a macro level, they're in this massive talent crisis. CPA enrollment's down almost a third since 2016. And you start
mm,
looking at that and it's like, well, why? Well, college students aren't majoring in accounting as much, right? They believe there's these other more interesting career opportunities. The salaries haven't gone up in the industry as quickly as other industries.
mhm,
And so there's a bunch of reasons why actually the accounting industry really needs AI to
mm,
relieve some of these pressures. And I think there's meaningful willingness to pay. And so you're right that like we will, in order to hit that, need to charge firms and work with a lot of firms. That is totally correct. You also drive a lot of revenue by selling direct to businesses. And
mm,
so a lot of businesses have internal finance, right?
mm,
They don't work with an external accounting team. And that's a huge percentage of the market.
mm. When you are thinking about, I really like what you said about like, it's 90% of like the services are like people paying for like the service, basically human resources, and then also like
Yep.
there's like a decreasing on people's willingness to go into the content industry. I wonder how is the industry kind of like flow? Is that going to be in the future just like people using a tool like Digits to automate this, and then you just have like a 1% accounting firm that does last mile checking, or for like 1,000 companies a year, or like what's the kind of like motto for the future? What are you trying to build to kind of like what's a vision for that?
Yeah, what you're talking about is what's called the client accountant ratio. So,
Mhm,
how many clients can an individual accountant serve,
mm,
right? And traditionally, you can think of it as roughly 10. Like you have an accountant, they have roughly 10 clients they're responsible for. That number is going to go up considerably. And it has to because the whole industry is again under this talent
mm,
crisis. And so you're probably not going to have one person for 1,000,
mhm,
but you could definitely imagine a future where you have one accountant for
mm,
100. And that would actually be great for the industry. The other big force that's happening is a lot of consolidation. So
mhm,
private equity has discovered the accounting industry over the past 6 or so years, and they're coming in and buying firms, merging firms, rolling up firms, and
mhm,
so you are going to have, I think, fewer, somewhat larger firms that serve a larger number of clients
mhm,
using modern software.
mm. I'm taking notes. So a lot of like merge, like consolidation, and so for like a small business owner, so right now people may hire a accountant to do like the monthly bookkeeping. Um, can people just do it on their own? So I'm pretty sure like people can, but like what's the
Yep.
solution for like the a lot of like the majority of like the small business owners?
Yeah, great question. If you look at the broader small business market, a lot of business owners do it themselves.
Mm,
And they usually do it on nights and weekends in Excel, or maybe they are using QuickBooks. It is a lot of overhead on them. They spend a
Mhm.
lot of time getting all their paperwork together and
QuickBook
doing the
is
books.
very hard to use. I'm sorry for QuickBook people, but
It is.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I have used it before, but I feel like the categorization is like it was a lot. So, but yeah.
Yes, it could be better for sure. And that's, I mean, one of the things obviously we're hoping to build and have built is the AI can do the categorization for you. What I will say, there's a difference between small businesses and venture-backed startups.
Mm,
And I think a lot of your audience is sort of venture-backed.
mhm,
In that world, I would not do the bookkeeping yourself.
mm,
There's a bunch of reasons for it. You're a Delaware C corporation. You're not an LLC. It's somewhat more complex. The investor is counting on you to scale the business rapidly. Even if you can do the bookkeeping for the next couple months, you're not going to be able to do it a few months after that. And
mhm,
I would just find someone that is trusted and is doing it correctly.
mhm,
And your investors are expecting accurate financial reports every month or every
mhm,
quarter, whatever they ask for.
mhm,
You do not want that to be on you. You should not be spending your time doing the bookkeeping for a venture backed company. And
mm.
so I see that as a big mistake a lot of first time founders make. I would really urge you, no matter who you work with, choose an accounting firm, come talk to us at Digits, doesn't matter. You should not be doing the books yourself.
Mm. So I know that you guys audience or like clients, I would assume are like the accounting firms. And then um what's your thought on pilot? I
Yeah.
don't I don't know how to ask like in a more smooth way, but yeah.
Yeah, so I know Wasim well.
Mm,
They've built a big business. They started, I think, 6 or so years ago and work with a ton of startups. The way I would describe Pilot is it is primarily an accounting firm, right? Like they have built a business on top of QuickBooks. They're doing your books on QuickBooks, and they have some tooling around that, but it is primarily a traditional accounting firm process.
mm,
And so what we do is, yes, we work with these 1,500 plus accounting firms. We also
mm,
work with US startups directly. And
mm.
so you can come if you're interested in seeing a modern software stack AI bookkeeping solution. That's what we've pioneered. And instead, we don't have a large team of accountants. We have our AI
The
doing it, and then we
technology.
have a
Mhm.
small team that reviews everything.
Um when you're picking like which model to use in terms of AI, I know that you're taking a multimodal approach, I assume.
Yep.
Because I think you said it in this other podcast. Um, can you briefly explain like how do you kind of implement the different models into doing what? I know people always say different model have different focuses and like have different advantages. How do you
Yep.
quickly feel like figure out which model to do what?
Really good question.
Mm,
So the way I would picture it is sort of
mm,
like a symphony, right?
mm,
You have all the different parts of your symphony playing the different notes and the different
mm,
instruments. We have a pipeline, a data flow pipeline that we literally call the orchestrator,
mm,
and it orchestrates all the different actions and models and so
mhm,
on. And so when a transaction comes in, it kicks off the models and asks for their input on the different models. And then all of that input is scored and selected, and we choose basically the best combination of answers. And
mm,
so this is why I keep going back to like the importance of systems engineering, like just traditional
mhm,
software engineering. The models are only a piece of the puzzle. A
mhm,
lot of the work is understanding how to string them all together and call them in the right sequence and understand the output to make the best decision.
mm. Okay. How do you measure that?
Great question. So the advantage with the accounting industry is you do have expert human accountants.
Mm,
And so, right, like in most startups doing AI, you unfortunately often have to pay for your data set. You have to pay for someone to tag it for training. You have to
mm,
pay for someone to evaluate it. There's a lot of overhead in training a good model. The
mm,
accounting industry has this very unique situation where they are doing that work every single month, right? They have to
mm,
close the books. And so, what we focus on is the percent of zero touch transactions. By that, I mean transactions that have come in, our AI has booked it, the human CPAs have reviewed it, and they
mhm,
didn't touch it, right? Basically, the AI got it
mhm,
correct. And
mm.
so, we can evaluate that every single month.
You should totally do that for the editing industry. I feel like editing a podcast is like needed to be changed even like when you have an editor. But anyway, so going back to
Yeah.
the zero touch point transaction. So like when people are checking these like results, shouldn't they like go back and then recalculate each one to make sure it's correct? Or like what's the fastest way to actually check these results?
So this gets probably into the weeds of accounting more than you want to.
Okay.
There are a lot of heuristics accountants use as they sort of review the whole chart of accounts and all
Mhm,
the activity for each month to
mhm,
identify patterns and mistakes. Because this has been a main job of the industry for decades, right? Like
mhm,
hundreds of years, even. Historically, accounting was done by hand, and you would have reviewers go through the books and make sure everything looks valid. And so they're using a lot of those same practices today on the AI inputted transactions.
I'm so sorry. I'm like literally chocked by the coffee.
No
But
worries.
okay. So when you're thinking about building the core product, I'm gonna die. I'm sorry.
No.
Oh God. So I wonder when it comes to like, can you just use one AI model to track the other?
You can to a degree. So we do anomaly detection
Mhm.
also with some AI models that can basically track unexpected output. And so you're right. You can definitely add in automated checks.
Um, what would you say would be like? I think you talk a lot about like company building when you were on the Sanford Tina Selling podcast.
Yep.
When you're engineering your engineering team, Um, how do you build a successful engineering team or like product team? What's your thought process on like who you need to hire and what are the core value they should be bringing in the current AI age of building a company?
Yeah. Great question. This has probably not changed that much with AI because I
Mhm,
still think you want a lot of the same tenets that have made strong engineering teams over the past 15,
mhm,
20 years. We look for deep expertise in one area.
mhm,
And you want sort of a breadth of knowledge elsewhere,
mhm,
but like you want every engineer to have some expertise in a specific thing, whether it's front end, back end, pipelines, whatever it might be.
mhm,
We look for a really strong growth mindset, basically always interested in learning and trying new tools. It's definitely a bad pattern if you have engineers who are like, no,
mhm,
I only do things one way because I've always done it that way and that's how it's
mhm,
going to be. Obviously, the landscape changes too fast for that. We want folks who are always willing to try and adopt new tools. And then we look for really intensive collaboration.
mhm,
And so this is an interesting one because you can get some very strong engineers who just go off on their own and sort of rabbit hole on one thing and pop out at the end of the week or end of the day or whatever it is with 1,000 lines of code, right?
mhm,
And that could be good, but it's not healthy as you're building a really integrated team and product and so on. And so we look for folks who really enjoy the collaboration process with other engineers, with designers, with product, with our customers team,
mhm.
like who want to understand the core raw customer feedback. And we found that if you combine those attributes, you get a really effective engineering team overall.
How do you, as a person who coming from like the product aspect of things, how do you think about building a product? How do you kind of like measure the timeline? So, for example, if we're building the AI for legal thing,
Yep.
so like I guess it's just kind of like a chat GPT, but with more data trained in the legal space, and then there will be like five lawyer in the end checking if this contract is actually illegal.
Yep.
But I wonder how do you build a technical product on top of that? So, for example, you use like a chat GPT wrapper, but like feed them the data from the legal firm or whatever. What's your thinking process on creating a timeline to manage these different aspects of it? And please throw as many technical knowledge to us as possible because I feel like I didn't ask it in a technical way. But
No, it's okay.
Mhm.
You're basically getting at scope, right? Like once
Yeah,
you decide what problem you want to solve,
yeah,
how do you break it down into a roadmap of milestones of like fully
correct.
solving that problem, right?
Yeah, and then
And
who
so,
to do what, and then how do you measure if they're successfully done? Because obviously some things may take longer or shorter.
right, totally. And so the core thing is going back to what I said about focus. I think you need
Mhm.
to decide the one thing it's going to do first, and then prove out that just core loop, whatever that core function is. And so I would build that first, and then you want to start layering on, okay, well, you need to be able to log in. You need to be able to get an email notification. You need to be able to invite your friend or co-founder or partner, whoever else is in the product with you. You start sort of surrounding it with this additional functionality. And I would think of it sort of like a universe, right? Like you have the core star, and then you
Mhm.
have all the planets sort of around it. Those are all the other features that are important, but are not core to it.
Mhm.
And so you're slowly layering on those. And then what you need to figure out is a lot of people forget the delight.
Mhm.
And there was this huge movement about the lean startup movement and MVPs and only building the basic thing and then launching it.
Mhm.
And I've actually disagreed with that for 15 years now.
Mhm.
I don't think any customer
Mhm.
really wants to use an MVP, right? They want to use something delightful that does their job.
Mhm.
And so I would rather restrict the features so that it only does one thing,
Mhm.
but then make that really delightful. So, like attractive UI, good design, you have these sort of
Mhm.
surprise moments in the product. You're doing something that the user doesn't expect.
Mhm.
That's what's going to cause them to go talk about it and spread the word.
Mhm. Um, I really like what you said about, like, just build the core function first and then just, like, stay focused, like, that's a main message, which I think it's amazing. Quickly say hi to the audience. "Hi, Sharon." Obviously, you got a compliment of your impressive career journey. But anyway, so I wonder, let's say, if we're building, call it like a, I think right now there's a lot of people building like AI for content generation, or let's say you have a
Mhm.
podcast and then split it into like 5 Instagram posts, like 7
Yeah,
TikTok, and then there's like 400 tweets. So, but the quality of it are just like really varies.
right.
If you're building something like that, I've seen people like just build like a no code tool, essentially use like made.com or something. Like so basically they link, it's kind of like a Zapier function, like they link A to B to C, and then
Yep,
there's an outcome.
yep.
Um, but it doesn't really like it's not really fine-tuned, and it's not really like in essentially the results, it's like unacceptable as like a human. You don't really want to put like launch something crazy.
Yep.
When you're trying to build an AI product, which kind of engineer should you be looking for? Is this just gonna
Mm.
be like another startup founder in this category, or should you post yourself like on the YC co-founder matching board and then be like praying someone to come along, or like what's gonna be the approach for you as a founder to like put something together?
Yeah, this is one of the hardest questions because there's unfortunately no magical answer here.
Mhm.
And this is why it comes down to the power of the founding team. And your first like judgment point as a founder is, can you recruit the people you need to build the product?
Mhm.
If you cannot do that, you are not a good enough founder to start the company and invest
Mhm.
in. And so I wouldn't, there's no shortcut. I would go to as many events as you possibly can, pitch the idea you want to build, try to attract interest from folks who have the skills necessary to build it. I think there's generally too many very sort of hobby side project startups out there where
Mhm.
they're not serious about what they're doing. You need to decide how serious you are and go find the team that can deliver
Mhm.
that product at a very high quality. Because you're right, the state of the AI models right now is they're generally not good enough. They're pretty good. They
Mhm.
do a decent demo, but then, as you said, when you start using it for a real thing, you're like, this isn't great. And
Mhm.
so, what do? Right? Like, you probably need to, if we're talking about editing podcasts, you probably need some real podcast editor humans that are like catching the mistakes your model's making and
Mhm.
filling in the gaps so that your customers are happy.
Mhm.
And then you're going to make a bet over time that you need fewer of those humans and you can scale more efficiently.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's an interesting parallel to the accounting space because in many industries, people think, oh, the job was good enough, right? And so we'll just let the AI do it and whatever, some people will like it.
Mhm.
That's not the case in accounting. The books have to be correct. And
Mhm.
so you cannot just give your transactions to an AI and be like, good luck, right? And so we've been very intentional of like, the AI does a lot, our human accountants do the rest.
Mhm.
And our story to our customers is that their financials are correct. That's the
Mhm.
only thing they care about. right? They
Mm,
don't care what percent was done by an AI if it's wrong. And
mm,
so I think when you're thinking about building a product with AI in a space, you have to do the full job to be done. You can't
mm,
just be like, oh, the AI did a B plus. Well, is a B plus good enough? Like that's what I think you really need to get serious about.
mm. How I guess, like, when you're selling it to the accounting firms, um, how do you think about doing the last mile? Because I feel like that's why maybe a pilot or something is, like, very successful, but there's, a lot of, like, I feel like a lot of people talk about AI agent. In the end of the day, it's like people are trying to create something that, like, even, like, I believe OpenAI is even trying to create something that's more domain focused. Like, I don't know. I don't know where I heard it from. Maybe this is, like, butchering the idea. But in general, I feel like people are going through a phase of, like, trying to create, um different vertical AI products to, doing the last mile of things. Um, how fast can we get there? And then what's the challenge of it? Why is, like, people are never gonna be able to create something that's a 100% correct and then get it done?
Yeah. So this comes down to like how close you think we are to AGI
Mhm,
and whether we're on the path to it,
mhm,
because the AIs can do a lot of pretty basic stuff pretty well, right?
mm,
But every field is filled with edge cases. Like your legal example, you're going to have a weird line in the contract
mhm,
that is completely wrong or something,
mm,
right? And that's
mm,
going to be a problem. One of the things that I've been thinking about is these models, especially the large language models, as they're trained, they do
mm,
a lot of back propagation. And so the training really bakes the knowledge into the model, right? But the whole point of real production usage is you are encountering a problem you have not trained on. And
mm,
so you're using all this training data to basically infer an answer to this new problem. But the way these models work is when you're inferring, they only do forward propagation, right? There is no back propagation. But humans, if you think about how humans think and how humans speak, you'll start saying something and you
mhm,
might catch yourself and be like, oh, wait, I didn't mean that. Like,
mhm,
let me redirect, right? Or I
mhm,
take that back or something.
mhm,
These models cannot take it back, right?
mhm,
There's no back propagation. And so I think that's what's limiting them from solving the next 10%, the edge cases, the last mile, as you call it, in order to get really good. We're going to need a new model architecture that makes that a lot more powerful.
new can you say more about the new model architecture?
So I don't know the answer. I'm sadly not a machine learning engineer. This is just my sort of instinct on understanding how these models work and what's
Mm.
needed.
What do you think you should focus your energy on in terms of the AI realm as a CEO? Like, how do you think about, as you mentioned, like AI as a tool, right? Like, how do you
Yep.
think about, like, which part to leverage AI to build? So, for example, would you say, like, I mean, I chatted with the other CEOs. Some people say, hey, like, they just talk to the staff, like, you either need to cut down 30% of the cost or you just produce like 30% more product with AI. Everybody
Mhm.
should use AI. Or like some other people would just be like, maybe just from the engineering angle, like leveraging GPT to, like, I guess, like a plug into their core main function. Like, so there's like different use case of AI within the company. Um, I know that you guys been doing machine learning for a while, but right now, since we're in like AI is like overly populated in the startup ecosystem, like how do you think about what to use AI, what not to use AI? And then is that like, for you to talk to your company, is that like every engineer need to like think about 5 ways to improve efficiency to use AI, or like what's the message that you would give to your team?
Yeah, really great question. So there's a couple layers to this. So the first is, are you using the AI internally
Mm,
or are you baking it into your product, right? And so like
yeah.
internally, are your engineers using stuff like Copilot or
Mhm,
Cursor or some of these
mhm,
tools that make coding faster, right? Are your
mm,
customer support folks using tools that can help write client emails and so on?
mhm,
Those I would just describe as internal use cases.
mhm,
Largely, you're buying something that another company's built and plugging it
mhm,
into your process, right? Then, and so highly recommend everyone invest in that and see
mhm,
what gains they get. The next step is, okay, are you going to put AI into your actual product?
mm,
And from there, you need to start getting really specific on what the use cases are.
Mhm,
Is this a generative use case? Like you want the AI to generate an image or text or whatever it might be. And so in that case, you would use an LLM like GPT.
mhm,
Or is this a predictive use case where you're asking the UI to sort of achieve work on behalf of the user and like making decisions? And if you want the AI to make decisions, you need a whole different class of model. And these are largely known as predictive models. And so I would start like getting more crisp on what you want. And
mhm,
then you have to realize there's a lot of founders building a lot of startups going through exactly the same thought process and sprinkling AI on top of their product, right?
mm,
And I would imagine if I had to bet that in 2 years, the AI is actually the least interesting part
mhm,
because it's going to be commoditized. Everyone's going to have that AI. What's actually going to matter is your product good? Because you can picture a great product with AI
mhm,
and you can picture a terrible product with AI.
mm.
And that's actually the distinction that's going to matter.
What would be your measurement on, like, how do you invest your time and resources to try out if AI would, like, significantly improve something? So,
Mm.
I feel like AI could help you like, let's say if you send I would say, like, every startup or, like, every company in general have a lot of operational work, or, like, internally, maybe exchange 45 emails per day or something.
Yep.
Yesterday, I was at the, I-40 summit, and then, like, there was a person, like, the founder of Reed presenting the AI, email optimization product. So basically, essentially, it can like recap your email into like the most important to least important message, and then like, kind of like help you draft it. I feel like that's kind of the pitch, right? Um,
Yep.
but when you're thinking about like, um, if I'm a founder, should I build that tool internally? How do you evaluate that? Like, because maybe building that tool will cost us 4 weeks, and
Right.
then, or like buying the tool will cost us X amount of money. And
Right.
then, like, how do I judge if my efficiency is actually improved, or maybe the amount of time that I spend on building this AI product, I could just respond like 5 email. So
Right. Right.
what's the kind of ROI calculation of building an internal tool or not? Or like, building a tool that will actually attract customer. Like how do you kind of um, balance that?
Yeah. Great questions. So this answer will be different if you're sort of a traditional small business or if you're
Mhm,
a venture backed startup.
mhm.
In a traditional small business, usually cash is king, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to make that decision based on cash flow and what you can afford to buy versus
Mhm,
build internally. On a venture backed company, typically time is all that matters, right?
mhm,
Like your obligation is to scale as quickly as possible and get to market before you run out of runway. And
mhm,
so, as I think about it, I would only build what I consider core to my business. If this is going to be core IP that's unique to me, that like that's what's
mhm,
going to be special and differentiate me, I want to build that 100% of the time because that's what's going to make the company different, right?
mhm,
If it's something auxiliary, internal on the side, whatever, it's not going to be your core differentiator. I would bias towards buying that because you're going to save a lot of time and you can
mhm,
just plug it in. And you don't really care if your competitor also plugs it in because that's not what makes you special,
mhm.
right? It's really just make the decision based on what makes you special.
How do you judge if that's what make you special? I feel like, for example, using a tool particularly, it could accelerate your efficiency. I feel like efficiency, it's not your core competency, but sometimes
Mhm.
it is. Like you mentioned, like a venture back startup time is like the essence here. Like, what's your thought process on like um judging the core differentiator? Because I feel like most of the product are kind of similar.
Yeah, this goes, I agree with you.
Mhm,
This goes into really knowing your market. The
mhm,
only person that matters in that decision is
mhm,
your customer. If
mm,
they think your product's unique, you've won. If they think your product is the same as all the others, you're toast.
mm,
Right. And so it like you just need to really understand your market, going back to what we talked about with customer development and what they are missing in the space. Because basically every space has competition, which is good. If the
mhm,
market's interesting, there's going to be competition. You need to have the next level insight of like why that competition is falling short. And that
mm.
should be the thing that differentiates you.
What's your process on like talking to the customer? Like what would be the question that you ask them to understand like your differentiation versus the competitors?
Yeah, you don't want to ask leading questions because then they'll just tell
Mhm.
you what you want to hear.
Mm,
You want to ask about their day to day
mhm,
and what their frustrations are, like why they have this problem, what causes the problem, how they go about solving it today,
mhm,
what other tools they've used, what they liked about those tools, what they didn't. Like you basically want as much context as possible. And
mhm,
then you're the one who's going to have to identify the
mhm,
root issues and differentiators. They're not going to tell you, right? Like if they are able to just tell you, it's probably too obvious of a problem
mm,
and there's a reason it doesn't exist or someone's already working on it or whatever. You really want to be the detective and like come up
mm,
with the answer from all the context you gather.
mm. What would be your framework to in the first, like, 5 weeks? Or, like, how long does a detective area should, like, take? Or, like, detective era? So is
Yeah.
that just, like, you cold DM, like, 10 like, 50 people on LinkedIn? Or, like, what's the kind of process of, like, acquiring these people? How do you make sure that they're diverse? Or, like, also, how do you make sure they're, like, paying customer in the end? Because I feel like a lot of people are like, "Yeah, here's, like, 400 ideas," and no one pay in the end.
Right.
Um, what's a kind of like
Yeah. So to make it really concrete, before we started Digits, my co-founder and I went deep in 3 other spaces.
mm,
And because we didn't know exactly what industry to go to, we wanted to do this exploration. And so we time boxed each one to a month.
mm,
And I think you can afford to do a full exploration in 1 month.
mhm,
And we did exactly that process. We did all the research into it, which took like the first day or two, and like trying to
mhm,
understand what's in the space, what the competition does, what does the industry look like, what are all the numbers. And then you start networking your way to people in that industry and get as many intros as you can, talk with as many folks as you can. That'll
mhm,
take a couple weeks to schedule all those and make those happen. And then you want to distill all that information and start shaping a product. Like if we entered this market, what would the product look like and why? How long would that take us to build? What would the advantages or disadvantages be? And then by the end of the month, you should be able to make a decision of like, is this real? Is this worth our time?
mhm,
And I won't go into the details of the industries we looked at because
mhm,
this was back 6 years ago. But you can do that in sort of rapid fire succession. And then we ended up picking the one that we thought, hey, this was the clear winner of the bunch. This was where the opportunity was. And that was modern accounting.
mm. How do you judge, is like the if this is like a good idea? So, like, would you be like building a MVP for each one, but you just mentioned you didn't really believe in MVP that much?
Yeah, I wouldn't build anything.
Mm.
I would do paper prototyping because
W
you can sort of
What is
sketch out or
paper? Oh, okay. Like, actually just sketch.
yeah, like Figma prototypes, right? What I mean by that is something that you can walk a customer through.
Mm,
And so, like, hey, if we built this and this is like roughly how it worked, would that solve your problem? And you can learn a lot from that. I don't think you need to build anything unless I would say, unless it's a deeply technical space and the solution depends on a technical achievement, then it might be worth prototyping that to see how hard it is.
mm. How fast do you ship the product?
So, going back to our lean startup conversation,
Mhm,
the sort of general advice has been ship as fast as possible, right? And
mm,
this is the whole concept behind Y Combinator. It's like,
mm,
hey, within the batch, you should ship something.
mm,
That is not the approach I've taken with any of the companies I've built. I have always aimed to ship basically a complete, delightful product. And so the story I'll give is Crashlytics. So back in 2011, we were building mobile crash reporting. We built the core product, like the core crash reporter, in about 2 months.
mhm,
And that was ready to test with folks and so on. But we did not launch it. We ended up realizing you needed to build a full onboarding flow, installer, packaging. Like if you were to get app developers to install this thing in their app, they really needed to trust it. And the
mm,
installation process had to be really elegant. So it could
mm,
be really quick for someone to install. We then spent 9 months building that installer flow. And so by the time we launched, it had been a full year. And what actually happened is a competitor called Criticism launched in between. So we
mm,
had the working product, we didn't launch it, they launched first, and then we finished our thing and launched. And what was interesting in at the time, our product was so much better because we
mm,
had polished it that from the day we launched, we just blew past them in market adoption.
mm,
And so it was definitely the right decision to wait and launch a really good product than rush something out to market.
Mm. I really like that. That's like a very differentiated opinion from like I would say the Silicon Valley mantra, which is ship
Yep.
fast
Yep. Yep.
and then adapt and stuff. Um, at the end, I want to like maybe focusing a little bit on like the angel investing side. So obviously, you're on some lists about like being a great angel investor. Um, tell us more about like the stories that like how you pick the founders. Obviously, you have
Mm.
shared about like the team having complementary skills. Um, I feel like how do you establish like thought leadership in the different, I guess, like infra dev tool community to kind of like attracting these like top deals?
Yeah, great question. So it definitely has to do with sort of what you've
Mhm,
achieved in your background and so on. I
mhm,
started angel investing with my co-founder after we sold Crashlytics to Twitter.
mhm,
That was in 2013.
mhm,
Since then, it's been now 10 years. We've done 100 angel investments. And so
mm,
we've been pretty active. I'd say on average, we do about one a month.
mm,
And we look for spaces and ideas that we have some relevant experience with.
mm,
And so typically we'll invest in software companies, whether it's developer tools or not, but we tend to avoid healthcare. We just don't know that industry. We
mhm,
tend to avoid a lot of hardware businesses just because we don't know the hardware space as well. And so you want to invest in something you feel like you can be helpful in.
mhm,
And then you look for the founders and teams and sort of product spaces, markets that you think are big enough
mhm,
to deserve a really great product. In terms of deal flow, it really does have to come down to sort of your just general reputation and network in the community.
mhm,
And we've been very lucky. We get a lot of deal flow from actually VCs who
mhm,
they're meeting with founders constantly.
mhm,
They do a deal and they want to make some room for angels on the cap table. And they really, really want currently operating CEOs to fill those
mm,
slots because you can then give their founders really tactical advice on
mm,
how to hire folks, product development, M&A, all the different topics that they might run into.
mm. Um, what are I guess like when you are thinking about the since you pick one company a month, I feel like there's more company you have to say no to. Um, what's a benchmark since they're already standing by VCs, assuming they're already passing the um, basic judgment test? How do you quickly evaluate beside like the the founder or like the complementary skill set? What are some other factors that you would factor in to do the diligence on putting money in one company versus the other?
Yeah. So from the angel investor side, it's
Also, I
really
think
hard.
you froze on the
Yeah.
video.
Why
Oh,
did my camera freeze?
oh my god. Is
Hold
this
on.
oh, okay.
Let's see. What is it doing?
Oh, you're back. You're
There
back.
we go. I'm
Oh,
back.
okay.
Okay. Excellent. So yeah, from the angel investor side, you unfortunately don't have a lot of time
Mm,
because my primary focus is building digits.
yeah.
I spend probably only a couple hours a month, like looking at new deals, and so you don't have time for deep due diligence. What I really look for is a smart founding team and a big market opportunity and a product that seems exciting.
Mhm,
And you can get that information in a 20-25 minute Zoom call. And
mm,
so what like your goal as an angel is not really to go deep on a few companies. Your goal is to go as wide as possible and do a large number of deals. And on average, then you'll have a bunch of successes, failures in between, et cetera. But I just don't think you have the time or the resources that a VC firm does because they
mhm,
have dedicated analysts who can do
mhm,
a lot of research into the market that you just won't be able to do.
mm. Totally. Okay, so let's end with like a quick 1 minute fire round. So, what's your favorite book?
Oh, man. I would say way back in the day, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, that's a
Dale
classic
Carnegie.
one. Very classy. Um, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Interesting. I would say our current board member, Peter Fenton,
Mhm,
he's a benchmark, but I was lucky enough to meet him while I was in college.
mm,
And he was an assigned mentor in one of our Stanford classes. And
mm,
so got to know him a long, long time ago. And we've stayed in touch. And he has been just a fantastic influence and super, super insightful.
mm. Uh, who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party? Um, you know what? I would invite the entire OpenAI founding team and
Oh
understand
gosh.
what is going on.
Uh, where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, love hiking, tennis, surfing, hanging out, and honestly, also just like angel investing and chatting with friends in Silicon Valley. I love the tech industry writ large. Like I love helping founders and just understanding all the latest innovations and getting as much time as I can on the side to code.
Mm. Also, let's plug into your future talk with like the founder to founder podcast.
Yes.
It's a
So
it's a live
started
podcast. Is this even considered a podcast or is it just like a live event?
It's funny. It's both. So yes, I started this event series in the spring called Between Two Founders,
Mhm.
and it's me interviewing another well-known founder for an hour. But the difference is, unlike a podcast, we record live in San Francisco in front of a large live audience.
Mhm.
So we just came off of one a few weeks ago with Christina, the CEO of Vanta. Fantastic episode. Where I'm sitting down with Imad from Mercury in a few weeks. And then we have another one coming up in November that we haven't announced yet that's going to be fantastic. So stay tuned. Between Two Founders, check us out on YouTube or join us live in San Francisco.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a fun conversation.
Really appreciate it, Grace. This was awesome. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, let me